They always told me never to answer who's there during hide and seek after midnight. I just realized why. My grandfather told me the rule when I was 8 years old, sitting on his porch in rural Vermont watching fireflies blink in the darkness. Never play hide and seek after midnight, he said, his weathered hands gripping his coffee mug too tight. And if you're foolish enough to ignore me, never answer if someone asks who's there. His voice had an edge I'd never heard before, something raw and afraid that made my stomach twist. I asked him why, but he just shook his head and went inside, leaving me alone with the insects and the question that would haunt me for the next 9 years. I'm 17 now, and 3 weeks ago I broke his rule. I understand why he was afraid. I understand what happens when you play games in the dark. And I'm writing this because the thing that followed me home isn't done yet. It started as a senior trip, 6 of us driving up to Berkshire Lake for Memorial Day weekend. My girlfriend Kira had planned everything, reserved 2 cabins through her cousin who managed the campground, made a playlist for the drive, packed enough snacks to feed an army. She was like that, meticulous and organized, the kind of person who color-coded her class notes and never missed a deadline. I loved that about her, how she made everything feel safe and planned. The group was me, Kira, my best friend Devin, his girlfriend Amber, and our friends Wyatt and Sienna. We'd all been tight since freshman year, the kind of friend group that actually survived high school drama and still chose to spend weekends together. The drive took 4 hours through winding mountain roads, and we arrived at the campground around 8 in the evening, the sun already setting behind the pine trees that surrounded the lake. The cabins were exactly what Kira promised, rustic but clean, with electricity and running water, positioned about 50 yards apart on the edge of the forest. We claimed our spaces, Kira and I in one cabin with Devin and Amber, while Wyatt and Sienna took the other. The plan was simple: spend the weekend swimming, hiking, having the kind of carefree fun that felt increasingly rare as graduation approached and college decisions loomed. That first night, we built a fire in the pit between the cabins, roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, told stupid stories about teachers we'd never have to see again after June. Amber brought a speaker and played music that echoed across the empty campground. We were the only ones there, the season not quite started, which made everything feel more private and perfect. Around 11, Devin suggested we explore the trails, but Kira vetoed it, said hiking in the dark was asking for twisted ankles and poison ivy. So instead, we just sat around the fire, drinking the beer Wyatt had somehow acquired despite being underage, talking about nothing important, enjoying the warmth and each other's company. Midnight approached, and the conversation turned to scary stories, the inevitable direction of late-night campfire talks. Sienna told one about a hitchhiker ghost on Route 7. Wyatt countered with something about a serial killer who supposedly hunted in these woods in the 70s. The stories got progressively more elaborate and less believable, until Devin stood up and declared we should play hide and seek in the forest, really embrace the horror movie aesthetic. Amber laughed and said that was the stupidest idea she'd ever heard, which naturally made the guys more determined to do it. Kira looked at me with raised eyebrows, silently asking if I was really going to participate in this nonsense. I shrugged and smiled, thinking it would be harmless fun, a story to tell later. My grandfather's warning hadn't crossed my mind in years. I'd written it off as old man superstition, the kind of thing people believed before they had smartphones and rational explanations for everything. Looking back, I wish I'd remembered. I wish I'd said no and convinced everyone to just go to bed, but I didn't, and that choice changed everything. The rules were simple. One person would count to 100 at the campfire, while everyone else hid in the surrounding woods. The seeker would then try to find the hiders using only a flashlight, and whoever was found first became the next seeker. Devin volunteered to go first, and Kira said she'd go second, which meant I had time to find a really good hiding spot. We spread out into the darkness, our footsteps crunching on dead leaves and pine needles, our breath visible in the cold night air. The forest was dense, full of massive oak and pine trees that blocked out the moonlight, creating pockets of absolute darkness between the pools of shadow. I could hear the others moving through the undergrowth, branches snapping, leaves rustling, occasional suppressed laughter. I went deeper than I probably should have, putting distance between myself and the campfire until the orange glow was barely visible through the trees. I found a spot behind a huge oak tree, its trunk wide enough to completely conceal me, and pressed my back against the rough bark. My heart was racing from the run and the adrenaline, that childish thrill of hiding and hoping not to be found. Devin's voice echoed through the forest, calling out numbers as he counted. 97, 98, 99, 100. Ready or not, here I come. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across tree trunks and bushes as he started his search. I controlled my breathing, staying perfectly still, listening to him move through the forest calling out names. Wyatt, I know you're behind that rock. Sienna, I can literally see your jacket. The sounds of discovery, footsteps running back toward the fire, laughter carrying through the trees. Then silence fell, stretching longer than it should have. I figured Devin was being tactical, listening for movement, trying to catch the remaining hiders off guard. But then I heard something that made my blood turn cold. Kira's voice, close by, maybe 20 feet away. Who's there? The words were soft, almost playful, but wrong. Wrong because Kira was supposed to be the next seeker, counting at the campfire, not wandering through the woods asking questions. I stayed frozen behind my tree, confusion mixing with unease. The voice came again, closer now, maybe 10 feet. Who's there? I could hear footsteps moving through the underbrush, slow and deliberate, not the hurried movement of someone playing a game. Something felt fundamentally off, like a note played sharp in a familiar song. I carefully leaned to peer around the edge of the oak tree, just enough to see without exposing myself. And there she was, Kira standing in a small clearing between the trees, her silhouette visible in the faint moonlight. She wore the same flannel shirt and jeans she'd had on at the campfire, her long dark hair falling past her shoulders. But she wasn't moving like Kira moved. Her head was tilted too far to the left, angled in a way that would be uncomfortable for any normal person, and her arms hung at her sides completely still. No fidgeting, no weight shifting, none of the small movements people make without thinking. Just absolute stillness, except for her head slowly turning, scanning the darkness. "Who's there?" she asked again, and I realized her lips weren't moving right. The words came out, but her mouth didn't quite match the sounds, like a dubbed foreign film where the timing is slightly off. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe it was a trick of the light, shadows playing across her face making it look weird. Maybe she'd decided to hide instead of seeking and was trying to mess with people. But even as I thought these things, I knew they were wrong. Every instinct I had was screaming that something was fundamentally not right about what I was seeing. Then I heard voices from the direction of the campfire, distant but clear. Devin announcing that Kira was starting her count. Kira's voice, the real Kira's voice, calling out numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. I looked back toward the clearing where the other Kira stood, the one who'd been asking questions, and she was staring directly at my tree. Not at me, I was still hidden, but at the tree itself, with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "I know you heard me," she said, and her voice had changed. Still Kira's voice, but flatter, emotionless, like someone doing an impression without understanding the person. I pulled back behind the tree, pressing myself against the bark, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't my imagination. Something was wrong, deeply and terrifyingly wrong. I heard the thing that looked like Kira moving closer, footsteps approaching my hiding spot with that same methodical pace. I had maybe 5 seconds before it rounded the tree and found me. My grandfather's warning crashed into my consciousness with the force of a car accident. Never answer if someone asks who's there. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. The game, the question, the rule that had seemed like pointless superstition. Whatever this thing was, it was using the game, using the question, trying to get me to respond. And if I did, something bad would happen. Something I couldn't take back. The footsteps were almost at the tree now. I could hear breathing, slow and steady, not the elevated breathing of someone who'd been walking through rough terrain. I looked around desperately for escape routes and spotted a fallen log about 15 feet away that I could potentially dive behind. But moving meant being seen, and being seen meant what exactly? I didn't know, and that uncertainty was almost worse than any concrete threat. The real Kira's voice echoed from the campfire, still counting. 43, 44, 45. Which meant I had less than a minute before she finished and started searching. If I could just stay hidden that long, she'd come into the forest, see me, and whatever this nightmare was would end because the real Kira would be here and the fake one would what? Disappear? I was grasping at hope like a drowning person grabbing at debris. The thing rounded the tree and I bolted, abandoning stealth for speed, sprinting toward the fallen log and diving behind it. I hit the ground hard, my elbow striking a root, pain shooting up my arm. I bit down on my lip to keep from making a sound, tasting blood. Behind me, I heard nothing. No footsteps, no voice, no sound at all. I waited, counting seconds in my head, reaching 100 before I risked looking back toward the tree. The clearing was empty, no sign of the thing that had been hunting me. Relief flooded through me for about 3 seconds before I heard Kira's voice again from a completely different direction. "Who's there?" Behind me now, between me and the campfire. I turned slowly and saw her standing 20 feet away, same tilted head, same wrong stillness. But this time I noticed details I'd missed before. Her flannel shirt was buttoned wrong, off by one button at the top. Her jeans were clean, no dirt or debris from walking through the forest, and her eyes, God, her eyes were reflecting the moonlight like an animal's, a bright flash of light that human eyes don't make. She took a step toward me, then another, closing the distance with that same measured pace that suggested she had all the time in the world. I heard the real Kira shout from the campfire, 100, ready or not, here I come. Her flashlight beam appeared in the distance, sweeping through the trees as she entered the forest. I stood up from behind the log, not caring anymore about winning the game or staying hidden, only caring about getting to the real Kira before the fake one got to me. The fake Kira's head snapped toward the approaching flashlight, tracking its movement, and I saw her face in profile. Her features were perfect, an exact copy, but there was something missing. some essential quality of personhood that exists beyond physical appearance. She looked like a photograph of Kira, two-dimensional and flat, despite being solid and three-dimensional. Then she turned back to me, and this time her mouth moved properly when she spoke. "Answer me," she said. "Just say something. Anything. Let me know you're there." The words were almost pleading, and I realized with growing horror that she needed me to respond. The game had rules, and she couldn't break them. She could ask, could hunt, could follow, but she couldn't do whatever came next, unless I answered. My silence was the only protection I had. I ran toward the real Kira's flashlight, crashing through underbrush, not caring about the noise or the branches whipping against my face. Behind me, the fake Kira matched my pace exactly, never falling behind, never catching up, maintaining that constant 20-foot distance. I could hear her footsteps, perfectly synchronized with mine, and when I jumped over a fallen tree, she jumped at the exact same moment. Kira's flashlight beam found me, and her voice called out, "Josh! Found you!" She sounded delighted, triumphant, completely unaware of what was happening. I grabbed her arm when I reached her, probably too hard based on her wince. "We need to leave," I said, my voice coming out harsh and breathless. "Right now, back to the cabins." She laughed, thinking I was joking, said something about me being a sore loser. But when she saw my face in the flashlight beam, her smile faded. "What's wrong?" she asked, and I told her we had to go, had to get everyone and leave the forest immediately. She started asking questions, but I was already pulling her back toward the campfire, scanning the darkness behind us for any sign of the thing that wore her face. We burst into the clearing where the campfire still burned, and I found Devin and Amber already there, looking confused. Wyatt emerged from the trees a moment later with Sienna. Everyone started talking at once, asking what was wrong, why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled and incoherent. Something in the woods, something pretending to be Kira, asking who's there. I saw it. Devin and Wyatt exchanged glances, the universal look of guys wondering if their friend has lost his mind. Kira put her hand on my shoulder and asked if I was feeling okay, said maybe I'd hit my head on a branch. The concern in her voice made everything worse because it meant they didn't believe me, thought I was having some kind of episode or panic attack. I insisted we needed to leave the campground. "Pack up and drive home right now." Devin asked if I'd been smoking something, his tone half joking but also genuinely worried. Amber suggested I sit down by the fire and drink some water. Their rational responses to my irrational fear made me feel crazy, made me question what I'd seen. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew. Kira compromised, said we'd all go back to the cabins and I could calm down, and if I still wanted to leave in the morning we would. The others agreed, clearly ready to end the weird night and go to sleep. We walked back to the cabins together. The group dynamic shifted from playful to concerned, everyone keeping an eye on me like I might bolt into the woods at any moment. Kira held my hand the entire walk, her thumb rubbing circles on my palm in the comforting gesture she always used when I was stressed about exams or family stuff. It helped a little, grounding me in something real and familiar. We reached the cabins and said goodnight to Wyatt and Sienna, watching them head to their cabin before Kira, Devin, Amber, and I went into ours. The interior was warm and well lit, aggressively normal with its wooden furniture and plaid curtains. Devin and Amber claimed one bedroom while Kira and I took the other, shutting the door and sitting on the bed together. She asked me to tell her exactly what happened, and I did, every detail, trying to make her understand how wrong the thing in the woods had been. She listened without interrupting, her expression carefully neutral, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Josh," she said gently, "I was at the campfire the whole time, counting. I never went into the woods until after I finished." "I know that," I told her. "That's what made it so terrible. There were two of you, one counting and one asking questions." She looked at me with such worry that I wanted to cry. "Stress does weird things to people," she said. "Final exams, graduation, college decisions, your mom's cancer diagnosis last month. You've been carrying a lot. Maybe your brain just, I don't know, glitched for a minute, made you see something that wasn't there." I wanted to scream that I wasn't crazy, that I knew the difference between stress hallucinations and physical reality. But I also heard how I sounded, claiming to have seen a doppelganger in the woods playing supernatural games. If someone told me that story, I'd assume they were either lying or having a breakdown. So instead, I nodded and said, maybe she was right. Maybe I just freaked myself out in the dark. The relief on her face cut deep. She kissed my forehead and suggested we both get some sleep. Said everything would make more sense in the morning. We changed and got into bed, and she fell asleep within minutes, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm I knew so well. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and rustle outside, wondering what the thing in the woods was doing now that it had lost me. I must have eventually dozed off because I woke to knocking on the window. 3 deliberate taps, pause, 3 more taps. I checked my phone, the screen reading 3:17 in the morning. The room was dark except for the faint glow of moonlight through the curtains. Kira slept beside me, undisturbed. The knocking came again, same pattern, same rhythm. I told myself it was a branch moved by wind, or maybe an animal, but But I knew better. I knew what was outside that window. Part of me wanted to look, to confirm, but a stronger part knew that looking was exactly what it wanted. Acknowledgement, response, engagement. I stayed in bed, keeping my eyes fixed on the ceiling, controlling my breathing so I didn't wake Kira. The knocking continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. Then it stopped. Silence filled the cabin, so complete it felt oppressive. I waited for something else to happen, some escalation, but nothing came. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me back under, and I slept fitfully until morning light filtered through the curtains and Kira's alarm went off at 7:30. We spent the next day pretending everything was normal, swimming in the lake, hiking the easier trails, cooking lunch over the campfire. The others treated me with exaggerated casualness, clearly under instructions from Kira not to mention the previous night. I played along, making jokes and acting relaxed, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Multiple times I caught movement in my peripheral vision, a flash of flannel shirt between trees, dark hair disappearing behind a boulder. But when I looked directly, nothing was there. That night, we stayed up late playing cards in Wyatt and Sienna's cabin, and when it got close to midnight, I suggested we all go to bed. Nobody argued. Kira and I walked back to our cabin holding hands, and she asked if I was feeling better. I lied and said yes. We went to sleep, and I forced myself to stay asleep when the knocking started at 3:17. Same window, same pattern, same horrible certainty about what wanted my attention. This time, Kira stirred, mumbling something about wind but didn't wake. The knocking lasted 15 minutes before stopping. I didn't look. Never looked. We packed up Monday morning and drove home. The group dynamic still slightly off, but recovering. Kira kissed me goodbye in my driveway and told me to get some rest. Said we'd hang out after school tomorrow. I went inside and my mother was in the kitchen making coffee, looking tired but stable. Her latest round of chemotherapy finished last week. She asked about the trip, and I gave her the sanitized version. All fun and no terror. She seemed satisfied, telling me she was proud of how well I was handling everything this year, juggling school and her illness and normal teenage life. Her words made me feel worse somehow, like I was failing her by keeping secrets about supernatural stalkers. I went to my room and crashed for 12 hours, only waking when my phone buzzed with a text from Devin. "Dude, Kira's worried about you. Maybe talk to someone?" I responded that I was fine and went back to sleep. That night, the knocking started at 3:17, but this time on my bedroom window. Second floor, 20 feet off the ground. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. I buried my head under my pillow and didn't look. The knocking continued every night for a week, always at 3:17. Always the same pattern, always on whatever window was closest to where I slept. My mother asked if I was feeling okay, said I looked exhausted. I blamed it on senior stress and she accepted that, too consumed with her own health crisis to dig deeper. Kira started to pull away, her texts getting shorter and less frequent, her excuses for why she couldn't hang out becoming more elaborate. I knew I was losing her, but couldn't explain why without sounding insane. 3 weeks after the camping trip, she broke up with me over text, saying she needed space and thought we wanted different things. The message was kind, but firm, the breakup of someone who'd already emotionally checked out. I read it sitting in my car in the school parking lot and felt nothing, too numb from sleep deprivation and fear to process additional loss. Devin texted an hour later saying he was sorry that he'd tried to talk her out of it, but she'd made up her mind. I thanked him and drove home. That afternoon, I saw her downtown, walking past the coffee shop where we'd had our first date. Except Kira was supposed to be at her grandmother's house 3 hours away, helping with some family thing. I knew this because she'd mentioned it in her breakup text as one of the reasons for her timing. I watched the girl who looked exactly like Kira browse the bookstore window, her movements just slightly wrong, her head tilted at that familiar, terrible angle. She turned and looked directly at me through the car windshield, and I saw that same flat emptiness behind her eyes. She smiled, and it was all teeth, too many teeth, like someone who'd learned about smiling from diagrams. Then she mouthed 2 words, "Who's there?" I drove away, my hands shaking so badly I nearly sideswiped a parked car. That night, the knocking came at 3:17 and didn't stop until sunrise. 4 hours of relentless tapping that I tried to ignore by putting on headphones and blasting music. My mother knocked on my door at 6 in the morning, asking if I'd heard the weird noise all night. I told her I hadn't heard anything. She looked at me, strangely, but didn't push. I started seeing the fake Kira everywhere. Outside my house at dawn, in the grocery store parking lot at dusk, walking past the school at lunch, always watching, always waiting, never approaching closer than about 20 feet. That same distance she'd maintained in the woods. I realized she was hurting me somehow. This slow, psychological siege designed to break me down until I did what she wanted, until I acknowledged her, until I answered the question. My grades started slipping. Teachers called me to their desks after class, concerned, offering extensions and suggestions for tutors. I accepted their help numbly, going through motions. Devin and Amber tried to stage an intervention, showing up at my house with pizza and worried expressions. They said I seemed depressed, asked if this was about Kira or my mom or something else. I told them I was fine, just tired, just stressed. They didn't believe me but had no ammunition to fight my denials. After they left, I sat in my room and researched everything I could find about hide-and-seek folklore, about supernatural entities that mimic people, about rules and games and questions. The information was scattered across forums and Reddit threads and obscure blog posts, but patterns emerged. The thing had rules. It could only appear during games played after midnight. It could only ask questions, couldn't make statements. It needed permission to fully manifest, which came through answering its questions, and it would follow its chosen target until they either answered or died. Found a forum post from someone claiming to have survived an encounter with the same entity. The poster said they'd managed to break the pattern by confronting it with a question of their own, turning the game back on the thing that was playing. The post was 3 years old with no follow-up comments. I had no way to verify if the advice was real or if the poster was just another internet bullshitter adding to the noise. But it was something. A potential strategy when I had nothing else. I decided to test it, to stop running and start pushing back. That night, when the knocking came at 3:17, I got out of bed, walked to my window, and opened the curtains. The fake Kira stood in my backyard, illuminated by motion sensor lights, her head tilted, her eyes reflecting. She raised her hand to knock again, and I opened the window. The night air was cold against my face. She smiled that too-wide smile and opened her mouth to ask her question. Before she could speak, I asked mine. Why? The word hung between us like smoke. Her smile faltered, confused, her head tilting further until it was nearly perpendicular to her shoulders. I asked again, louder. Why do you need me to answer? What happens when I do? She took a step backward, the first time I'd seen her retreat. Her form flickered slightly, like a television signal disrupted by interference. Then she vanished completely, blinking out of existence between one heartbeat and the next. The yard was empty, silent. I waited for her to reappear, but nothing happened. I closed the window and went back to bed, adrenaline keeping me awake until dawn. The next night there was no knocking at 3:17, or the night after. For 2 weeks, I slept undisturbed, started catching up on schoolwork, began to hope that maybe I'd actually solved the problem. Devin mentioned that I seemed more like myself lately, less haunted. I thanked him and meant it. Then Kira called me, the real Kira, her voice small and scared in a way I'd never heard before. Josh, she said, something's been following me at college. I've been seeing, and she paused, struggling with the words. I've been seeing you, but not you. It's wrong somehow, and it keeps asking me things. My stomach dropped through the floor. I asked what it was asking, and she said, Who are you? Over and over. Who are you? She was crying now, said she'd been seeing it for a week, thought she was going crazy, finally decided to call me because I was the only person who might believe her. I told her I believed her completely, that I knew exactly what she was experiencing. The relief in her voice was painful to hear. What is it? She asked. What does it want? I told her everything. The camping trip, what I'd seen in the woods, the 3 weeks of stalking and knocking, how I'd finally confronted it and thought I'd won. But I hadn't won. I'd just redirected it. The thing had moved from me to her, shifted its attention to the person it had been mimicking. Kira asked what we should do, and I said I didn't know, that I needed to research more, to understand the rules better. She begged me not to leave her alone with this, and I promised I wouldn't, that we'd figure it out together. We stayed on the phone for 2 hours while she sat in her dorm room with her roommate gone for the weekend, both of us trying to pretend that my voice through the speaker made her safer. Eventually, she had to hang up for an early morning class. I sat in my room surrounded by printouts and notes, trying to find a pattern in the chaos. The forum posts and blog entries contradicted each other, offering conflicting information about how to stop the entity. Salt circles, iron nails, religious symbols, none of it felt right. The thing wasn't a traditional ghost or demon. It was something else. Something that existed in the space between games and reality, sustained by rules we didn't fully understand. My phone buzzed with a text from Kira's roommate, Jess, someone I'd met once at a college visit. Josh, Kira's not doing well. She's been up for 3 days straight. Says she keeps seeing you outside her window. The RAs are talking about calling campus security. I'm really worried. I called Jess immediately, and she described Kira's deterioration over the past week. The paranoia, the exhaustion, the insistence that something was hunting her. Jess had tried to be supportive, but was clearly struggling with the boundary between friendship and enabling delusions. I asked if she believed Kira and Jess was quiet for a long moment, before admitting that something weird was definitely happening. She'd seen a guy who looked exactly like me standing outside their dorm at 4 a.m, but when she went down to check, no one was there. And the knocking, God, the knocking every night at the same time. 3:17, always 3:17. I told Jess to stay with Kira, not to leave her alone, and that I was driving up immediately. The college was 2 hours away. I threw supplies in my car, everything I thought might help based on my research, and texted my mother that I was going to visit Kira. She responded with a thumbs-up emoji, happy I was reconnecting with my ex, completely unaware of the real situation. The drive was endless, each mile feeling like 5, my imagination conjuring worst-case scenarios. I arrived at Kira's dorm building at 6 p.m, the sun already setting. casting long shadows across the campus. Jess let me up, and I found Kira in their room, looking hollowed out, dark circles under her eyes, her hair unwashed and tangled. She burst into tears when she saw me, collapsing into my arms, her whole body shaking. I held her while Jess watched from the doorway, clearly relieved to have backup. Kira pulled away and pointed to the window. "It's out there right now," she whispered, watching. I looked and saw nothing, but I believed her. The thing was patient. It could wait. We needed a plan before 3:17, before the knocking started and Kira's fragile composure shattered completely. I pulled out my research, spreading it across her desk, and we went through everything together. Jess joined us, surprisingly open-minded about the supernatural explanation after witnessing enough weirdness to crack her skepticism. We debated strategies, argued about which folklore traditions seemed most reliable, tried to build a coherent defense from contradictory information. 3:17 approached and we heard the first knock. Kira flinched but held her ground. 3 more knocks, the same pattern. I walked to the window and opened it, looking down at the figure standing in the courtyard. It was me, or a version of me, same height and build, wearing clothes I owned. But the details were wrong, just like with fake Kira. My shirt was misbuttoned, my shoes were untied, and my face was too smooth, like someone had photoshopped out all my minor imperfections. The fake me tilted its head and spoke in my voice. "Who are you?" The question hung in the air. Kira stood behind me, her hand gripping my shoulder. I leaned out the window and asked my own question. "What game are we playing?" The thing flinched. Same confused reaction fake Kira had shown. Its form flickered and it took a step backward. I pressed the advantage, asking more questions. "What are the rules? What happens if we win? What happens if you win?" Each question made it retreat another step, its form destabilizing further. Then it spoke, and its voice was no longer mine, but something older and vast. "You cannot win a game you do not understand, but you can forfeit. Answer me, and forfeit your place. Refuse to answer and forfeit your mind. The choice is inevitable." Then it vanished, leaving the courtyard empty. Kira collapsed into her desk chair, shaking. Jess asked what the hell that meant, and I said I thought it was a bluff. Desperation from something that was losing its power. The entity fed on the game, on the questions and answers, on the ritual of hide and seek after midnight. By refusing to participate, by asking questions instead of answering them, we were starving it. The thing had said we couldn't win, but that wasn't the same as saying it could win. We just had to outlast it, maintain our refusal until it gave up or faded away. Kira asked how long that would take, and I admitted I didn't know. Days? Weeks? There was no way to predict. Jess said she'd help however she could, that she'd witnessed enough to be convinced this was real. We made a plan. Kira would move into my house for a while, putting physical distance between her and the dorm where the thing knew to find her. We'd take shifts staying awake during the 3 o'clock hour, never facing it alone. And we'd keep asking questions, turning the game back on the entity every time it appeared. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was something. Proactive, instead of reactive. We packed Kira's essentials and drove back to my house, arriving around midnight. My mother was already asleep, her bedroom door closed. I set Kira up in the guest room and we sat together until 3:17 approached. The knocking came on the guest room window. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. Kira started to cry again, but I held her hand and we walked to the window together. I opened it, and there were 2 figures in the yard now. Fake me and fake Kira standing side by side, their heads tilted in unison, their expressions blank. They spoke together, their voices overlapping. "Who are we?" The question felt like a trap, like answering would give them definition, make them more real. I asked them instead, "Why do you need to know?" They flickered, their forms losing cohesion for a moment before stabilizing. "We are what you made us," they said. "We exist in the space you created. We need your acknowledgement to be complete." I realized then what they were. Not demons or ghosts, but something we'd accidentally summoned through the game. By playing hide and seek after midnight, by creating the conditions where asking who's there had power, we'd opened a door for something to slip through. Something that needed our belief and participation to fully manifest in our world. We'd given it shape by running from it, had fed it with our fear and attention. The only way to unmake it was to withdraw that attention, to refuse engagement completely. I closed the window without responding, drawing the curtains and turning away. Kira asked what I was doing and I explained my theory. The things weren't intrinsically real. They were thought forms, entities created by our belief and sustained by our fear. Every time we ran, every time we acknowledged them, we made them stronger. The solution wasn't to fight or banish them, but to simply stop playing the game. Stop giving them the energy they needed to exist. Kira was skeptical, but desperate enough to try. We went to the living room and turned on a movie, something mindless and loud, deliberately occupying our attention with anything except the entities outside. The knocking continued for an hour before stopping. Then, silence. We waited for something else to happen, but nothing did. At 5 in the morning, we both fell asleep on the couch, exhausted but cautiously hopeful. I woke to my mother making breakfast, the smell of bacon and coffee filling the house. Kira was still asleep, curled up with a blanket I'd draped over her. My mother asked how long Kira was staying, and I said a few days, that she needed a break from campus stress. My mother smiled and said it was nice to have her around again, that she'd missed Kira's presence in our house. The next night, there was no knocking at 3:17, or the night after. 5 days passed and the entities didn't reappear. Kira started sleeping through the night, her color returning, her anxiety decreasing. We went back to school and people commented on how good we both looked, how it was nice to see us hanging out again. Devin asked if we were back together and I said we were figuring things out, which was true enough. The trauma had bonded us in ways that made our previous relationship feel shallow by comparison. We'd seen something most people would dismiss as impossible, had survived it together, and that shared experience created intimacy that transcended normal romantic boundaries. 2 weeks after implementing our strategy of complete non-engagement, Kira moved back to her dorm. We maintained contact through daily phone calls, checking in, making sure neither of us had seen signs of the entities. Everything seemed stable, normal. I started to believe we'd actually won. Then Wyatt called me 3 weeks later, his voice tight with fear. "Josh, something's wrong with Sienna. She's been acting weird since the camping trip. Keeps talking about seeing people who aren't there. Claims something's following her. She mentioned you and Kira experiencing something similar. What the hell happened in those woods?" My blood turned to ice water. The entity hadn't given up. It had just changed targets again, moving to someone else who'd been there that night, who'd participated in the game. I asked Wyatt specific questions about Sienna's experiences, and every answer confirmed my fears. The knocking, the stalking, the doppelgangers asking questions. The same pattern, the same progression. I told Wyatt I'd explain everything, but he needed to bring Sienna to my house immediately. He asked why, and I said, "Just trust me. This is life or death serious." Something in my tone convinced him. They arrived an hour later, Sienna looking fragile and frightened, Wyatt hovering protectively. We sat in my living room and I explained everything. The folklore, the rules, the nature of the entities, our strategy for surviving. Sienna started crying, relief flooding her face at finally having validation that she wasn't crazy. Wyatt looked shell-shocked, but asked practical questions about protection and prevention. I called Devin and Amber, told them they needed to come over too, that everyone who'd been at the campground that night needed to hear this. They arrived confused and skeptical until Sienna described her experiences, and they saw how serious we all were. I laid out everything I'd learned, showing them my research, explaining the pattern. The entities were working through all of us, one by one, trying to find someone who would answer, someone who would complete the game. We needed to present a unified front, all of us refusing to engage, starving the things of the attention they needed. Devin asked if this was really happening, if we were honestly talking about supernatural stalkers. Before I could respond, the lights flickered, then went out completely. The house plunged into darkness. I checked my phone, 3:17 exactly. Of course, outside the windows we could see them, 6 figures standing in my front yard, perfect copies of each of us, their heads tilted, their eyes reflecting in the porch light. They raised their hands in unison and knocked on the glass. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. The synchronized precision was horrifying. Then they spoke, all 6 voices blending together into something that wasn't quite sound, more like pressure against eardrums. "Who are we? Who are you? Why won't you answer? Why won't you play?" The questions poured through the walls, relentless and desperate. Amber screamed. Devin grabbed a baseball bat from the corner. Wyatt tried to call the police, but his phone had no signal. The entities pressed against the windows, their faces flattening against the glass, features smearing like wet paint. They weren't bothering with pretense anymore, weren't maintaining the illusion of humanity. They were showing their true nature, thought forms trying desperately to become real, to force their way across the boundary through sheer willpower. Kira grabbed my hand and shouted over the noise that we needed to stick to the plan, needed to refuse engagement no matter how bad it got. I nodded and gathered everyone in the center of the room, away from the windows. We sat in a circle holding hands while the entities raged outside, their knocking becoming pounding, their voices becoming a roar. My mother's bedroom door opened and she stumbled out, disoriented, asking what was happening. I told her to join us, to sit with us, and she did without question, her trust in me absolute, even when nothing made sense. The assault continued for hours, the entities throwing themselves against barriers they couldn't cross, sustained by our fear but unable to manifest fully without our acknowledgement. Slowly, gradually, their efforts weakened. The pounding became knocking, the roar became whispers, the pressure decreased until we could breathe normally again. At dawn, the entities vanished, fading like fog in sunlight, and the house was quiet. We stayed in the circle for a long time, processing what we'd survived. My mother asked what those things were, and I told her the truth. Everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she simply nodded and said she believed me, that she'd seen enough during her cancer treatment to know reality was stranger than people admitted. Her acceptance broke something in me, and I cried for the first time since the camping trip. Really cried, all the fear and stress pouring out. Kira held me and everyone else sat with us until I was cried out, and empty and strangely peaceful. We developed a support system after that night. Group texts checking in, regular meetings to discuss any sightings or experiences, a shared understanding that we were in this together. The entities appeared occasionally, trying different tactics, showing up at our schools or jobs, but we maintained our refusal to engage. Weeks turned into months, and the appearances became less frequent. The things were starving, losing cohesion, fading back into whatever space they'd emerged from. 6 months after the camping trip, I went a full month without seeing my doppelganger. Kira reported the same. One by one, we all experienced the entities giving up, their attention moving elsewhere or dissipating entirely. By graduation, we were tentatively declaring victory, hopeful that the worst was over. We stayed close throughout college, our friend group tighter than most because of what we'd survived together. We never played hide and seek again, never went camping after midnight, never asked who's there in situations where someone might answer. My grandfather died when I was 19, during my freshman year of college. At his funeral, I found a journal in his belongings, entries dating back to when he was 17. The handwriting was shaky but readable, describing an experience identical to mine. A camping trip with friends, a midnight game of hide and seek, entities that mimicked and hunted. He'd lost a friend to the things, someone who'd answered the question and been taken to whatever place the entities came from. Thanks for sticking with me all the way. If you liked this, hit subscribe and drop a like so you don't miss the next wild story.